All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. Today is a special day, not only because it is Halloween Day, but because it is our Rocky Top Insider Tennessee basketball season preview. My name is Rick Butler. Joined with me, as always, is the one, the only Ryan Shumpert, getting ready for another big crossover month in the world of Tennessee athletics. Ryan, how are you doing today? We just recorded an episode of the RTI Press Pass yesterday. Well, now we're back today to talk a little bit of basketball.
Yeah, doing well. That was a great first word to say on a podcast, but doing well. If you needed any more evidence that, Rick is a better podcaster than me, besides me saying, yeah, is my first words as a podcast, Rick went back and listened to our preview podcast from last year, which was on November 1st, so one day separated. And he was laughing at, we spent the first couple minutes of that podcast talking about how cold it was. Well, the high today is 80. Me as a warm weather person. Now, granted, I'd probably rather it be a little bit cooler than 80. I'm very happy, very blessed that it is 80 degrees, and I'll be wearing shorts when I leave today to go do basketball media and not have to put on a jacket. So that has me in a good mood as a reminder of how much colder it could be as the calendar it gets set to turn to November.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I've got a jacket on right now, and it's not even a heavy coat for those who are just listening to the audio version of this podcast. But even I'm like, man, I need to get this thing off at some point. It is a little bit toasty. The sun is coming through the big window over here in the living room. So certainly a little bit of different times than last year. But hey, hopefully everyone has a good Halloween, or you had a good Halloween. We won't get into that. We did plenty yesterday on the football show. Ryan, today we're going to be talking a little bit of basketball. Obviously, Tennessee, the reigning SEC regular season champions. We know what last season looked like, but there's been a lot of turnover since last season. Let's go ahead and break it all down today. And I kind of just want to start with the roster, because I know that people are familiar that there's been a lot of turnover, but let's just kind of set the scene. I think we'll probably be going for about 45, 50 minutes today. Let's just go ahead and set the scene about where Tennessee basketball is. However, now that I'm thinking about it, before we do that, let me go ahead and point you guys to, after this show, could not possibly recommend more going and listening to the RTI Press Pass preview podcast, another preview podcast, right? So you'll get all of your good information before the season starts on Monday. But Ryan actually sat down with Sports Illustrated's Kevin Sweeney, and they put together just a tremendous recording, breaking down all things Tennessee basketball, breaking things all things SEC basketball. That was a really great show. You can either go and find it wherever you're listening to the audio version of this show right now, or you can head over to the Rocky Top Insider YouTube account and go and find the show there. But either way, it is very, very good, very informative. And Ryan, frankly, it's fascinating for me. You know, we deal with local media so much, and there's nothing wrong with our local media. I love our local media, but it's fascinating to also hear the perspective of somebody who covers the more broad world of college basketball and how they view Tennessee from sort of that 30,000-foot view, not being able to be there on a day-to-day basis like we often get to be. How is that experience for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just interesting to get his perspective on things, and we didn't do quite as deep as the dive as we'll get into today, but, just to see what he thinks about this team, kind of toss some of the questions at him, or theories. It's things I found interesting to see, to get his thoughts on it, and kind of see where he thought Tennessee stacked up in the SEC. So all that was interesting to get an outside perspective. Someone I think does a really good job covering sport. And, it's funny to that exact point, which I think he teased or promoted at the end of the podcast. I think on Monday he had an article ranking every single team in Division 1 to 364. So you talk about being a pretty macro project he was working on.
And no kidding.
I'm sure talking to a lot of different people to try to figure out the SWAC and the Big South and the Southland Conference, all the conferences that you don't even, we're not talking the A-10 or the Missouri Valley. Yeah, or the Missouri Valley or the Ohio Valley, or the SoCon, small conferences that most big college basketball fans at least know a little bit about a couple teams. You got to go pretty deep into the weeds. So just to your point, that's kind of a funny dichotomy between, we talk about a real outside, broad view of the Vols.
Yeah, no kidding. Again, you can go and find that over on the Rocky Top Insider audio accounts, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and then, of course, YouTube as well, if you want to go ahead and find Ryan's conversation with Sports Illustrated's Kevin Sweeney. Okay, now we can get into the roster. Tennessee looking a little bit different heading into this year compared to where they were last year. We all know that Dalton Knecht is out in Los Angeles now with the Lakers, but Tennessee lost some key pieces aside from his. Well, Santiago Vescovi is out the door. Josiah Jordan-James is out the door. Jonas Adu, Tobe Awaka, Freddie Dilion, DJ Jefferson. There was a lot of movement out of Tennessee's program for one reason or another. Some of those running out of eligibility, some of those hitting the transfer portal. Obviously, Dalton Knecht being an NBA draft pick himself. Ryan, what were your first impressions about just sort of the way that Tennessee built back this team? We know that Rick Barnes, how often he emphasizes defense with his teams. But, man, I'm looking at the list right here, and I'm looking at these 4 transfers, and I see offense, versatility, maybe a little bit of defensive presence, so some physicality, especially with D-Stone Dubar, but certainly an offensive presence here from this transfer portal class.
100%. I think the thing that stood out is, to me, it was a roster built around Zakai Ziegler. That was the plan, to build around him. That you put the one guy that you don't necessarily think of as an offensive piece being Felix Okpara, the Ohio State center transfer. Fantastic defensively, not quite as far along offensively, but he's a really good lob threat. And we've seen it when we've got to watch practice that those two seem to have a pretty good chemistry together. Zakai and Okpara, that is. So a player that can play the pick and roll at a really high level with Zakai. And then the other 3 guys, you talk about some shooters spaced around them. And Chaz Lanier was the best shooter in the transfer portal last year, 44% from 3 at North Florida. I think he made in the 80, 90 range of 3-pointers, a lot of them. D-Stone Dubar is a guy at Hofstra that does have some physicality, but shot, I think it was about 40% from 3 and hit somewhere in that 70 range last year, hit a bunch of threes. And then Igor Milicic, who maybe not quite as dramatic as a stretch 4, kind of a 6'10 stretch 4, but he shot, I think, 37% from 3, hit 30, 40 threes in an offense that's a really slow, not up-tempo offense over at Charlotte. So they added a lot of shooting around Zakai Ziegler. They added a big man they think could be a good lob threat and play well with Zakai. So, and obviously they added one high school kid in Bishop Boswell too, though I don't think he's going to have a massive role this season. But they built what they brought in to build the roster from the transfer portal. It was a lot of guys I think they thought would blend well with Zakai Ziegler. And certainly I think and we'll talk more about this later, but to me, the plan, it seems like, to replace the offensive production that you lose with Dalton Knecht. There's no single player is going to be able to come in and give you what Dalton gave you, was just to be a better shooting team and to have more guys space to the court and be able to knock down shots.
Absolutely. That was absolutely my first impression too, because I think you look at this crop of guys and you don't maybe see that one absolute superstar, but you see a lot of guys who can contribute in different type of ways. Some of the most impressive things about some of these players that they picked up is just the versatility that they bring to the table, especially when you're talking about like a guy like Igor Milicic. I think he's a 3-level scorer. He's one of those sort of European ball style guys where he can do different things on the court. It's going to be really fascinating to watch how some of them mesh together. We're going to be breaking down those here in a bit coming up. But then also you look at the roster, 3 returning seniors, 3 returning sophomores, 4 transfer players, and then the one freshman that you mentioned a minute ago with Bishop Boswell. Ryan, I kind of want to start with the sophomore players, because we're going to be talking about Zakai Ziegler and Jemai Mashak plenty over the course of this 40 to 50 minute show or so. But you're talking about those 3 sophomore players, Cade Phillips, JP Estrella, and Cameron Carr. JP Estrella really got some minutes as the season went on last year, and especially in tournament play. Had a nice little showing against Purdue in that final game of the year. But he is battling injury right now as Tennessee heads into the season on Monday. Which of those 3 sophomore players to you is most intriguing? Just sort of the path that they've taken so far and maybe the opportunity that they could have in front of them. Is it Cade Phillips, a guy that we've seen a lot of the practice court here recently? Is it JP Estrella, the guy who was maybe the most prominent of that trio last season? Or could it even be a surprise pick like Cameron Carr with the different kind of things that he can do on the wing? Which one of those most intrigues you?
Well, intriguing is definitely Cam Carr, because his ceiling is by far the highest to me of that group. Now, I don't think we're going to see him reach it this year, and I think he's going to be a guy that might be even a little bit frustrating at times to watch, because I think he's going to be just inconsistent. I think you might see in flashes in games where he can go score 15, 20 points, is really consistent offensively, and you're going to see games where he just doesn't even play a ton because the defense is an issue right now, which it shouldn't be in my estimation, just with his build and his frame. Like, he should be a really good defender. But
Yeah,
you heard
the
Rick
length
Barnes talk.
too.
Yeah, you heard Rick Barnes talk about it the other night after the exhibition game against Indiana. He said the one thing I told Cam Carr is don't get back cut. Do not get back cut. And I remember the exact play he's talking about where Cam Carr just isn't paying. He's ball watching and not paying attention. Wouldn't be the right word. He's ball watching, and it didn't even lead to points. The guy just cut to the other corner, and Cam Carr is a second late. And his guy's in a different ballpark. So he's the one that's the most intriguing to me, because I think that this season specifically, his ceiling and his floor are so far apart from one another. And we'll get in more later about some of the questions I have about this Tennessee team. But when things do click for Cam Carr, I think he has the ability to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, I like what you say there, and there does just seem to be, you mentioned inconsistency. I think you'll even look back at that exhibition game against Indiana, which I actually meant to mention at the top of the show today. We'll get into it here soon, maybe a little bit later on. But there were just some moments where you saw some head-scratching mistakes. And yes, that might happen during an exhibition game. That might happen earlier in the season. But those are also the kind of things that can hold players off of the court on a Rick Barnes-led team. We certainly know that Rick Barnes is tough on him in practice. He wants to get him where he needs to be. But again, I think some of those just head-scratching mistakes are what could be that thing that separates Cam Carr from being a player able to consistently get on the court versus a player with just a high ceiling that you see some flashes of here and there this season. But then JP Estrella is another very interesting player for Tennessee, another second-year player rising up in this program, but he is battling this injury. What do you sort of forecast from JP Estrella here, especially early on in the season?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting from that standpoint. The injury, it's not like it's keeping him out. He played a good number of minutes in that Indiana exhibition, 9 minutes. So, I think you'll see his minutes kind of slowly go up. To me, even besides the injury, he's clearly Tennessee's number 2 center behind Okpara. So I don't think you're going to see him play a ton of minutes. I think more than anything, when we talk about the injury, I think it's just limited what he's been able to do this offseason. And while it might not affect his minutes a ton early, affect just how quickly he can kind of hit the ground running, get into a groove. But he's a guy that's going to play. I think, what he needs to give Tennessee is some sort of offensive juice, a guy that can throw it down to on the block and score some. He's shown that potentially. I think my question for him is just what he can do defensively. Very, very, very limited sample size, but his defensive statistics last year, and even rebounding statistics, when you look at offensive rebounding percentage, defensive rebounding percentage, block percentage, were not great. So how much better is he there? I do think that's something that I worry about with the foot, which is the injury, a foot injury. If that is limiting him in any way, that's kind of where I feel like you could maybe see that most is on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm curious about that. But certainly he's a guy that's going to have a big role on this Tennessee team. And the Vols need him to be effective, because if not, they're going to be really, really dependent on Okpara at 5.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Hey, one thing that I did want to kind of, I guess now that we've only got one sophomore left in this trio to get to, so we might as well just kind of mention it right here before we get into some other stuff. One of my questions with Cade Phillips is, and I was very excited to kind of ask you this question on the show here today, but when it comes to Cade Phillips, what is going to you, and I might not even be in the right ballpark with this question, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but what do you think impacts his time on the court more? Is it his own play and preparation, or is it how these transfers ahead of him are looking throughout the season? Just sort of what, is he going to be a player that fans can maybe expect to see in the rotation a little bit more? What are ways that he can make an impact on this team, especially just, again, with the other players that Tennessee has brought in to have an impact in some of those rotational roles?
It's a little bit of all, both those things, as it typically is. I do think he's going to play. I think he's going to be Tennessee's second 4 behind Igor Milicic before Darlington Dubar. Now, I think you can see Tennessee play small a lot and have Jemiah Meshach running the 4 and take some of those minutes when Milicic isn't on the court. So to me, I guess the questions for Cade when it comes to himself, I think it's twofold. Is he able to play with enough physicality and rim protection to play the 5 some? Like, could he be a small ball 5? I mean, he's only I'm not sure what he's listed at. I guess 6'9",
I'll grab
probably
it.
roughly what he's listed at. So can he play the 5? Can he hold up there? Can he play
6'9", 212 pounds.
And he plays tough, undoubtedly, but it's not like he's
Yeah.
the most physically imposing guy either. So can he hold up there? And then 2, can he shoot the ball enough from the perimeter that defenses have to respect it when it comes to the 4? Because I think that's what is going to be a big part of, all right, can Tennessee run a lineup with Cade Phillips at the 4 for an extended amount of time and it be a decent offensive lineup? And I think that's the question. That doesn't mean he has to hit 23 pointers even this year, but it has to be when he's wide open, can he take those shots and hit enough of them to make defenses respect him? He didn't ever, granted, he didn't play a ton last year, but we didn't really ever see that hardly in practice last year. That's something we've seen a lot in practice this year. He's shooting it a lot. It's a big point of emphasis this offseason. I actually talked to him a good bit about it during Tennessee's in-house media day, what those workouts looked like, what he was trying to, what his itinerary, or however you want to call it, schedule. It's probably a little more formal of a word, but what his offseason
is game plan, maybe.
Yeah, to progress as a shooter is. So to me, I think those are the big questions. Obviously, there's a lot of more micro stuff that he just needs to do well. He had 3 turnovers in the exhibition. He can't do that. He missed 2 shots at the rim, were pretty good looks. He needs to be able to finish those. But the thing about Cade Phillips is he's going to do a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff, the physicality. I think he's a smart player. I think he's, he does a lot of the little things well. So if he can get a lot of those big things well and answer some of those macro questions, I think he's, going to have a chance to have a pretty sizable role. And either way, I think he'll be into rotation some.
Yeah, nitty gritty is a good way to put at it. He seems like a scrappy player from what we watch at practice. He seems like a guy who wants to be out there on the court, and I don't necessarily look over something like that. I think most guys playing at this level, right, want to contribute and want to make an impact. But I don't look past a guy that you can tell who you can see sort of the journey that he's taken to get to this point, and maybe to have this opportunity in front of them. A guy who scraps for things on the court, a guy who, like you mentioned, needs to clean some things up. But I'm excited to see sort of maybe what that second year leap or second year step can be for him as we get to this season here coming up in a few days. All right, let's take things out a little bit. Ryan, I've kind of bombarded you with questions about the sophomore players here to start this thing out. I want to talk about what's exciting us about the team. And I like to start myself here because there's something that I think a lot of people have been really giddy about when it comes to the media coverage from this team, just what's been coming out from the media. Obviously, guys like us who have been covering it over watching practices throughout the preseason. But we talked about Felix Okpara being one of Tennessee's transfers who enter the program. Man, I think, and you talked a second ago about how a lot of the transfers were built around what they can do with Zakai Ziegler. There's not a lot that gets you more excited than maybe the potential of Zakai Ziegler and Felix Okpara playing that role together because of the movement and the athleticism that I think that Felix Okpara brings to the table. He is very good around the rim. I think that he can hold his own, but just the way that he can run that 2-man game with Zakai Ziegler, I think that gives you a lot of eagerness and anticipation about what those two guys can do this season, especially as they grow and continue to become more comfortable with each other as time goes. That was actually one of the first things that we heard. I can't remember which assistant coach. I believe it was Rod Clark, maybe during one of the summer workouts, who that was one of the first times that we heard about just how good that connection was between them. You saw it a little bit against Indiana, but I think that's really going to be a thing that Tennessee fans not only see, but love to see as the season goes on, because I really think it's going to be effective for Tennessee.
Certainly, it needs to be. If for Tennessee to have
it does.
Some semblance of a 2-point offense, I think that needs to be a go-to. And I think that's going to be one that's just going to be interesting to see how it develops as the season goes along, how teams defend the pick and roll. I would expect to see a good bit of drop coverage to try to force Zakai to hit a lot of floaters and try to take away some of those lob opportunities to Okpara. So it'll be really interesting. I mean, Okpara had the hardest matchup of anybody in the exhibition against Indiana. I mean, Omar Ballo, I think, might have been the number one player in the portal.
Yes.
I know was an all Pac-12 guy at Arizona for a couple of years. Tennessee did play him back in Tucson in what would have been the 22-23 season. I think that was December of 22 when that game was.
That's right.
But he's a really good player, and Okpara wasn't just great in that game or anything, but he was solid. Blocked 4 shots, which, I mean, he's a really good shot blocker. and I think maybe the thing that stood out, I mean, Tennessee was not able to connect on many of those lobs. And the way I think Akpara is going to score a lot of his points, he didn't really score points in that game. And some of that, would be offensive rebounds and putbacks. And Balo is obviously a really good defensive rebounder. So I don't think Akpara was able to do a ton on the offensive glass. But he did show a little bit. He had, I think, 2 different baskets where he scored, catching the ball down low with his back to the basket and making a little move. That's something that I wasn't really expecting to see from him a ton. Maybe it's again, anything we talk about the Indiana game, and most of it, you're glad it's a 1-game sample size because Tennessee did not look very good. But it's just a 1-game sample size. We'll see how much he can continue to do that. But I thought that was almost an encouraging sign from Akpara against the Hoosiers.
Yeah, Tennessee's 66-62 loss to Indiana just last Sunday afternoon right here in Knoxville. Tennessee scores 26 points in the first half. They scored 36 points in the second half, so plus 10 between the two halves. I don't, that was an exhibition game that Tennessee did not play well in, especially in the first half, especially offensively. Indiana did not either. You had a funny tweet about the game that I can't really remember. Oh, it was the collusion tweet between the teams. I thought that was funny, and you can expand on that here in a little bit. But to me, I took that as, hey, it wasn't great. They, maybe getting some nerves out. There's a lot of way to go in this season. And certainly the season opener has not even come yet. Maybe Rick Barnes's comments after the game sort of perked my ears up a little bit more. But when we talk about Felix Akpara, because I think he's going to be a player that people really hone into this year, especially here in the early days because of the impact that he's going to make, just because of the size that you see, right? When you look at Tennessee's court, when you watch a game, I don't know about you, I don't know about other people, but he's the first person my eyes kind of find simply because of his size right there in the middle of the court. Ryan, when you look at what Akpara brings to the table, there's a lot of Tennessee fans who are used to what Jonas Adu has done for Tennessee over the last couple of years. How does Felix Akpara sort of stack up to Jonas Adu? What's going to be a little bit more similar? What do you think is going to be a little bit more different with what Tennessee fans can expect watching this team versus what they've sort of known in the past?
Well, I think Jonas definitely has a little bit more of, I guess a little bit more of a developed offensive game. I think a little bit more consistent. Not that he had a ton of post moves, but just turning right shoulder, finishing, left hand with that baby hook. I think he was pretty good at. I think Jonas will hit a lot more 15-foot, or last year hit a lot more 10, 15-foot jump shots than Akpara will even take this season. Like, that's not something in Akpara's game. Now I think Akpara is probably a little bit better rebounder. I definitely think he's better defensively, which Jonas was pretty good too. But I just think Akpara's elite there. And, one of the questions I had, I thought Akpara would be a little bit more physical than Jonas was. Obviously that was a huge issue for Tennessee last year. You just look at the games Tennessee lost. It was so frequently to teams with talented back to the basket big men who were physically very strong. Zach Edey twice, Hunter Dickinson, Tolu Smith twice at Mississippi State. They beat Auburn, but Janai Broome had an awesome game, which, all those guys are really good players. So you don't just say that, it wasn't like it was easy for Jonas to defend those guys. But I think Felix, naturally a little bit more physicality. And then I think that's another thing that was a solid sign in the exhibition against Arizona is that Balo is a very physical big man, and you saw him handle himself well. He did not get pushed around inside. Balo doesn't, I wouldn't say he's as skilled as an Edey or a Dickinson was. I'm blanking on the guy at North Carolina too, the big fella.
Baycott.
Yeah, Armando
Baycott.
But he's still a guy that typically scores a lot. He scored 6 points on 3 of 8 shooting in that game. So I think the defense as a whole will be better. The rebounding probably slightly better. I don't think you're going to get quite as much offensively, though. I do think maybe, when you're just right under the basket, face to the basket. Akpara just plays, the way he just dunks a lot of stuff around the rim. I think could be a little bit better than Jonas.
Yeah, I can see situations where maybe you have this guy Ziegler just creating a little bit of offense at the top of the key or maybe driving down the basket, and something happens where a slide goes too early or a slide comes too late, and Akpara is sitting there under the basket with an opportunity. But I also think he's going to have those opportunities in transition, and that's an area where I not only see being advantageous for Tennessee because of their speed and their length down the court, but I see it being a necessity for Tennessee. I think that there are going to be times where this half-court offense is prolific, and I think there are going to be times where this half-court offense is very, very sluggish. I think transition is going to be one of those things that can be a more consistent through line throughout games, depending on whatever the half-court offense looks like. And I was thinking about whether I wanted to say this or not all morning, and I guess I now am, but I wonder if I see, take a player, Derek Lively, a guy that Tennessee played a couple years ago back in the tournament when he played at Duke. I now see him, what he's doing in the NBA. He's not a giant Hulk figure right there in the middle of the court at the center position. He's a little bit more athletic. He's got a little bit more length, but what he can do is run the court. He can get in advantageous positions down the court. And the Mavericks or Duke back in the day, they had players who could go and feed them in transition. He's really found a sweet spot in that. I like Felix Okpara in a same sort of role. I think that he can score in transition, but I think that Tennessee's going to have enough speed and sort of versatility to where transition's going to have to be a spot that they excel at, because I think that they have the opportunity to.
For sure. I generally, I think the Lively comparison is pretty good. Akbar's not quite that.
Okay, because I was nervous. I was nervous that one might get blown up as soon as I know it's not perfect, but I'm happy.
Yeah,
it's on board.
Lively is such like a far end, especially college Lively, far end deal where he really didn't score at all.
No.
And Akbar I don't think has the NBA measurable.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Akbar is right, and I'm not saying that he's going to be the 10th overall pick in the draft or anything like that. But just sort of when you're talking about one style of big man that's huge and powerful in the middle of the court, and then you're talking about another kind of big man that's a little bit more versatile and can run a little bit better, I think Akbar tracks in that category. And Lively's just a player who's been on my mind, mainly because of my 2K preferences.
Yeah, he's on your Mavericks. But to your point as a whole, I think Tennessee's going to have to play fast offensively again. Talking to some coaches, that's something that they've highlighted when they're talking about being good offensively, is that they think they can be very good in the first 8 seconds of the shot clock because of a lot of the shooting that they have. And, Tennessee, the tempo is never going to be crazy, crazy high just because of defense. But last year, you don't hardly ever see a dichotomy like this. Like Tennessee's offense last year, average shot clock or average possession leak was 15.9 seconds, which was the 24th fastest in the country. So top 25. Defensively, it was 18.4, 347. So, you're talking about about as far on the two ends of the spectrum. And I think Tennessee's going to need to keep some semblance of that. I worry about the depth a little bit because there is some questions there when you get past like 7 deep as to who emerges as trustworthy guys, and some of that just goes back to the sophomore question we talked about earlier. But Tennessee's going to need to do that because of the shooting. I think you're right. I think in the half court, things will at times get bogged down for Tennessee. I think they're really going to need to push the ball. You saw it in the exhibition, both Cade Phillips and Igor Milicic. I think we'll see it more if Milicic got rebounds and pushed the ball. They weren't looking for a guard. They got there and kind of started to break. And I think Tennessee's got a lot of guys that can do that. And I think that they're going to continue. I don't know if it'll be top 25 in the country, but I do think, it will remain top 50, top 75. And if it doesn't, offense possession links, what I'm talking about. If it doesn't, I think that doesn't bode well for Tennessee offensively. I think that means that they're getting dragged into a lot of half-court games, and they're really just having to grind out games to win.
So, Ryan, still talking from a broad level. I just talked about Felix Okpara, how much he excites me for this team and the different kind of things that he can do. I'll throw it over to you. What is most exciting to you as you get ready for this team to start their season on Monday?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's what the offense can look like when it is clicking, when it is making shots, because there's so many guys that I think they can play, they can shoot well. And that probably sounds silly coming off of an exhibition.
I know I was just about to say the same thing.
Where they shot 8 of 35 from 3. Look, I don't think the offense is going to be perfect by any means. I think it's going to have some very frustrating nights. But I do think we're going to see at least a couple games when Tennessee is shooting really well from 3 and everything clicks. It's going to be pretty, and it's going to be fun to watch just from being able to space the floor with 4 guys out and a really good rim threat inside. So I guess I'll say that from like an excitement standpoint. A lot of things intrigue me. I feel really confident the defense is going to be really good again, but it always seems to be. So from an excitement standpoint, I'll say, what Tennessee's offense can look like when it is clicking, I think could be really fun to watch.
I'm glad that you mentioned that a second ago. That was actually a question that some of my buddies were debating in a group text that I was in just a couple days ago. More questions on the offense or defense with this team? We know that Rick Barnes is a defensive-minded coach, but they did bring in all that talent from the offensive side of the ball. So I'll pose that to you. More questions about the offense or the defense at this point in the season? Maybe it's a question we'll check back in on in January or so. But at this point right now, with the season a couple days away, which one do you?
Oh, significantly more offense. I have very few questions about the defense. Defense is just about, I think, getting some of the new guys tied in and just seeing their growth. Like, you need those new guys to be able to do what Jordan Gainey did last year, where he never became an elite defender, but he was good and was up to date with everything Tennessee was doing by the end of the season. You didn't notice him out there in a bad way ever. And Dalton got better too, so I don't mean to, crap on his defense necessarily, but Dalton's defense being bad at any point in the season you could live with because of just how much he gave them offensively. I don't think Tennessee has a single player on this team that is going to become close to that. That you can just live with what some consistent defensive issues because of how talented they are offensively.
Not to mention, I think you've got three really good defenders at different levels on the court. You've got Zakai Ziegler playing the point. You've got Jemai Meshack on the wing, and we know that his versatility can expand from that. And then we spent a lot of time so far talking about Felix Akpar in the middle of the court as well. When you have three defenders like that can span the width of the floor, if you will, that can fill the space of the half court, man, that puts you in a good position no matter what's going on with those other two players or how you're kind of rotating those guys in. If you've got at least two of those guys on the floor, I think that Tennessee is going to be in a good spot defensively. And then you're right. How can those other guys just improve their game, step up their game enough to be on a competitive level with those other guys? I think that's how Tennessee gets back to that defensive mindset that, we've come so accustomed to knowing from Rick Barnes' squad.
Yeah, for sure. Like the floor is very high because of that fact. You just have, like you said, three positions at the guard spot, at the wing spot, and at the center spot. I think a defender each that's probably top 5 in the country. Now you still have to tie all that together. You have to glue all that together to be an elite unit with all 5 guys. But yes, like just having those 3 guys not only makes the ceiling really high when everybody else can round into form and they can play cohesive as a 5-man unit, but I think it also just makes the floor pretty high too, because Akpar is going to be able to erase a lot of mistakes. Meshack and Ziegler are going to be able to take a lot of other teams' best perimeter players out of games or really limit what they can do, while also forcing a lot of turnovers.
So Ryan, credit to you over the last couple of weeks, especially. You've spent a lot of time over at the Tennessee basketball training facility. I have as well, not as much. And then you were at the game against Indiana while I was traveling, covering that game for Rocky Top Insider. You've seen a fair bit of Tennessee basketball so far this fall. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would always like to be able to see more. If they want to let us watch more practice, I wouldn't complain. But yeah, no, I feel like I've watched a fair bit this fall.
Let me ask you this then, and you can take it in any different direction, obviously, whichever way you want to go. What do you think you know about this team? And I say that as one of those typical, kind of stereotypical, hey, here's how we're talking about a team. Here's something I think I know about it. What do you think that you've known, or what do you think that you're finding out about this team? What do you think you know about this team before Tennessee gets to their season opener in just a couple days?
Well, I'll just start one briefly there. I think Tennessee will be a top 5 defensive team in the country again this season. They've been at each of the last 4 years. I think I know that. I think I know that they're going to be really good defensively, which once again, I think sets a pretty high floor for what this team can be. I think that sets at the very least a fringe top 25 floor, no matter how inconsistent their offense might end up being if, things don't live up the hype there. I think I know that this team is going to be incredibly, incredibly dependent on Zakai Ziegler. I think Ziegler is going to end up playing more minutes than he should every game. Now, I think it'll look maybe better than it did without him when he was out against the Indiana game, because I think they ran a lineup there when he was out for a couple minutes in the second half. And really, when that game got away from Tennessee, a lineup, they're just not going to play that much. But with all that being said, I just think they're going to struggle to create offense when he's out. When he was out of the game, both for a very short stint in the first half and then a couple more minutes in the second half, it's just a lot of there's not a lot of guys that can initiate offense for Tennessee. So I think that's going to be important for White to have to play a lot, and I think it's just going to be them putting a lot on his shoulders when he is out there. They need other guys to be able to create some And I think that's a big question that I have about this team too, as to who else can do that. But I know they're going to be dependent on him, and it'll be curious. They were very dependent on him 2 years ago, and I think there were some limitations that came with that. This guy's definitely a better player now. How much more? And I think they have a better team around him in the sense that it'll be harder for opponents to defend him if they're making shots, or at least they have guys that should shoot better than they did 2 years ago around them. So how much better does that version of an offense, I think, could look similar to 2 years ago with Sakai being the number one guy to. What is a Tennessee offense that I think largely will be dependent on Sakai like it was 2 years ago? How much better can that look with one, an older Sakai, a better Sakai, and two players around him that can play better with him, that are more in sync to maybe be able to knock down those shots and score at the rim like Akpara can?
Yeah, he's going to be. We know how important he's going to be to this team. He's not only the engine of what they do with the ball in his hands, but he's also the heartbeat of this team. And I think that he takes over that leadership spot. I actually think I saw a couple days ago on a Tennessee basketball social media account video that he is now the back-to-back recipient of the Houston Leadership Award inside the Tennessee basketball program. So we know that he's going to be the engine of the team. We know that he's going to be the heartbeat of the team. There's players around him that kind of help him fill those spots out from time to time. But yeah, I'm certainly curious as to what his usage is going to be. It's going to be a long season ahead for Tennessee. If he's pushing that 37, 38 minutes per game early in the season, and if Tennessee really needs him to be in those spots to be competitive in those games, then I think that is something a little bit telling for conference play, but we will assess that as it comes. But no question about it. So those are some of the things that you think you know, and excuse me in case you hear some gardeners in the background here. I guess they have decided that their Halloween fun is going to be in this neighborhood here around the 11 o'clock hour in the morning. Those are some of the things that you think you know heading into this season. But obviously, you don't know everything about what this team is going to be. What are some maybe lingering questions that you still have about this team during preseason action that you've seen so far?
Well, I'll give you two, and one we talked about earlier is what does Tennessee get from its sophomores? I think that's just such a big question, and it's a rangy question from, and I won't talk at length about it because, we talked about all of these guys, but Cam Carr, it's very high ceiling. JP Estrella, a guy that's going to have to play a lot. How much can he truly be productive instead of someone that's just out there, taking up space? And then Cade Phillips, like, just what does his role look like? How many minutes does he play? Is he a guy that's dependable for Tennessee? We talked about all these questions. To me, I could see all three of those guys a somewhat wide range of what they give Tennessee. Now, to me, the question is, can you, and it ties into Zakai, can Tennessee find some consistent 2-point offense? That was missing in the Indiana game. It's a question I've had all offseason because I don't know one who can, from a perimeter spot, who can put a lot of pressure on the rim besides Zakai. I don't think Chaz Lanier, I think he's going to be a good player for Tennessee. I don't think he's going to be somebody that just creates a ton off the dribble. So who else can do that? Is it Cam Carr? I think Cam Carr has the potential. I think Igor Milicic, when the defense gets moving and is in rotations, is athletic enough to get by people and is a good finisher at his height. But I don't think he's a guy that in an ISO situation can score. And that's, again, where I think JP Estrella is so important, because I do think JP Estrella is a good back-to-the-basket scorer and has the potential to be that. So can he come along and be a real threat for Tennessee there, a guy that is capable of giving them, 10 to 15 points every handful of nights out if they need him to? To me, that's a big question too. So where the 2-point offense comes from, maybe not even where it comes from, can they find it? To me is a big question, because I think for Tennessee's shooting and all that to be at its best, you got to be able to put some pressure on the rim and have defenses worry about that. If defenses are just trying to run Tennessee off the 3-point line, then I think that severely limits how much you can depend on that 3-point shooting.
Yeah, and I think that was something that sort of went hand in hand last year, is that Tennessee did have enough sort of 2-point capability that it could get those guys open on the outside. And those outside shots weren't always hitting, but certainly gave them opportunity and a little bit of wiggle room. Tennessee's got some shooters this year. I think there's no doubt about that. We've seen it at practice. We've heard it from people inside the building, but it's about getting those shooters open and in advantageous spots. And I think that's kind of the question for me for this offense is how How efficiently can that be done? And a lot of that's from what you're talking about. Is any of those younger sophomores going to step up in a big position right there? How did the transfers come over? And just sort of what does that synchronization look like? To me, I'm looking at the efficiency of the offense. It's kind of just, hey, how is this going to look here? I know that we'll find it out here soon, but that's sort of one of my questions before we see Tennessee get into true play with my own two eyes.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% a fair question. And I think there's just a lot of questions for what the offense looks like as a whole, because there is so much new. And even with the new players, even though a lot of them have played college basketball, most of them haven't played in, at the same level as the SEC. And a lot of those guys, at least Dubar and Lanier especially, are going to be asked to do very different things. They're going to be in different roles than what they were in their past school. And that'll be the case for Milicic too, though I think maybe not quite as dramatic. So all that leads to there just being a lot of questions of what the offense will look like.
Hey, one other question that I had watching that Illinois game, and I got to go back and maybe I can see. Tennessee was around, going back to that Indiana game. Tennessee was down, like 8 points left in those final 2 minutes or so. Do you kind of remember where that was exactly?
They were down like four points. Let's see. The biggest, they were down by 4 points with 1 minute left. That was 6 points with 4 minutes left, and then 4 points with 1 minute left was the biggest the deficit was.
Ryan, obviously, closers are important in college basketball, just like they're important in baseball. A guy to step up and shut down the game when you need him to. I believe Zakai Ziegler took one of Tennessee's final shots that could have either tied it up or could have put them ahead late in the game. I think we know that Zakai Ziegler is going to be such a prominent player for this Tennessee team. To me, he strikes me as the most likely candidate for who that closer at the end of games is going to be. But I wonder who else can be that person for this Tennessee offense. And a lot of that, and some of that goes back to what you were talking about earlier in the preview. Who can create their own offense besides Zakai Ziegler? Maybe who can have the ball in those last couple of minutes of the game and put the team on their back? It's not like I don't believe that Tennessee doesn't have one, but without Dalton Knecht, we know how great of a closer that he was. I mean, he was a phenomenal closer. You saw a lot of different things that he did at Tennessee last year. We know that Zakai Ziegler is going to be a big offensive threat for Tennessee, but that is a question that I have. Just I'm anticipating seeing how that unfolds, and you need close games to figure out who's going to be a closer. So maybe it doesn't unfold, precisely for a while, but that's one of the questions that I have going into the season. Who is going to be a closer for Tennessee? Do you have that question as well, or do you think that's maybe a little bit more solidified than where I'm at with it?
No, one of my biggest questions. I mean, it goes just to the thing I talked about a few minutes ago of creating your own shot. That's just how these games end up being at the end of the game. You're just getting a lot of isolation type situations or pick and roll type situations. And, I think Zakai is the most likely, but I think we saw Zakai in that role a lot 2 years ago, and it wasn't always the best because it's hard to do that as a 5'9" player. Like that's just, you're going to be limited in that. So yeah, I think that's a huge question. I think it could maybe be Chaz Lanier at times. Maybe there's some times where you feel like you can throw it down in the post, and if you feel good about one of those guys as a passer too. But yeah, I think that's a question, and one that I would even be willing to go as far as saying I think it will be a weakness. A lot of times questions aren't weaknesses; you just don't know. I think that I do think that's going to be a weakness for Tennessee.
And a concern, I think that could potentially present itself at different points in the season. Look, this SEC schedule, not to jump ahead to a different topic real quick, but the SEC's it's a tremendous league. Yes, and this is something that you and Kevin Sweeney talked about. Yes, it does not have the national championship pedigree that other leagues have, but from top to bottom, there's a lot of very strong teams in this conference. I see games where Tennessee's not only going to have to close that at home, but maybe they're going to be in a position to close out a game on the road. And there you go. That's when you got to step up, and that's when you got to make plays happen. We know that Zakai Ziegler is a guy who hates losing, who does not want to go down swinging without a fight. Who else is going to step up and be that guy who can say, hey, you know what? Give me the ball or give me an opportunity. Give me a shot from the wing because I'm going to hit it and I'm going to knock it in. I think that's a concern just in the sense of, you need to have a good one to compete in those specific SEC moments. And like you said, we'll see how Tennessee goes about in finding that. But I definitely have that question. And especially I think just It made sense. It kind of all worked out in that Indiana game that Tennessee was in one of those positions of, hey, here's an early opportunity for a closer to step up. They did not have it happen in the eventual 4-point loss to the Hoosiers, but certainly a question I think that fans will be posing as the season goes on as well.
For sure, and I just think the way Tennessee's offense is built, like, you're going to see a lot of inconsistencies. And I feel like you see that more on the road. Shooting teams struggle shooting on the road more than they do at home, and I think that's almost a scary recipe from the standpoint of the SEC is so deep this year, and because of that, I just don't think there's going to be many easy games on the road. There's not going to be many free wins.
No,
so I think you're going to see Tennessee in a lot of tight games, a lot of challenging games on the road, and their ability to win some of those is going to be big. Because I'm sure, I feel confident they're still going to be really good at home, and they're going to win, 7, 8, 9 games at home in conference play again. But can they find a way to, even go 4-5? Like, if they go 4-5 on the road, I think that would be really, really good. Which is going to sound crazy, but I really think it would be. And Kevin and I talked about this too, but like, it just feels like a year where 12 wins, 13 wins might be good enough to win the SEC regular season.
Hey, one thing that fans have certainly talked about, and this is something I was also excited to ask you about here on the show today, but one thing that fans have pointed to in the last year or so, and I can't believe we've gone 45 minutes without really talking about Jahmai Mashack, but that as great as Jahmai Mashack is on the defensive end of the court, because make no mistake, he is absolutely one of the nation's best defenders at especially with the versatility that he has and what he can do on the court. But a lot of people have talked about, hey, if only Mashack could make a couple more shots per game, if only he could, improve that bar for his offensive game just a little bit more, how much more well-rounded of a player he would be. Yes, I think that everybody wants Jahmai Mashack to get that offensive game, maybe tighten down a little bit more. I think he would say the same thing about his own game, just wanting to be a better basketball player, both individually and for the team. My question to you is, and this isn't to say that, any one player can just stay where they are and they'll be perfectly fine in the next season. I think improvement is always necessary. But does the offensive talent that Tennessee brought in, the versatility and the different guys that Tennessee not only brought in but are trying to elevate from within the program as well, does that mitigate at all some of the need for Jahmai Mashack for that offensive improvement? Again, I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying that, he can just stay where he is and rest on those laurels and be fine. But does it mitigate some of that conversation because they are going to have different guys around him who can shoot the ball? I know that was the case last year as well. Both Vescovi and James had slumps at times to where they weren't shooting. So you did have a little bit more of a limited specific offense. But do you think that mitigates that at all? Or do you think that's kind of just a farce in saying that, hey, no, Jahmai Mashack is going to be a part of this offense in one way or another? He's got to still be able to hit the shots that he makes.
I guess the way I would say it is, I don't think that's the offensive plan for Tennessee to be good offensively is not riding on Jahmai taking some huge step offensively. And I might, their plan, the way they put it together, it might not, be successful. But I don't think that's something that the Tennessee's coaches were banking on. Jahmai to make some big jump offensively to help carry this offense, and I don't think that's going to happen. Could he get better? Yeah, certainly.
Yeah,
he probably will get better, and he's a guy that would be big if he can go from, I think he averaged maybe 4.5 last year to just 7 points a game, and because this game is a guy that can get to the basket and score some in the paint. We just spent time talking about what a big question it is for Tennessee to have some sort of ability to score a 2-pointer, have a 2-point offense, and I think Jahmai has the ability to be able to do that some. Not that he's going to be, I think, that in-the-game closer, but anything they can get from him will be big. And when his offense is at its best, I think he does answer some of those questions. But I guess to your question to me, like I guess yes, a little bit, like it does mitigate some of that need, or at least I don't think that they're banking on Jahmai to take some huge step.
If I had heard the answer before I asked the question, that's how I would have asked the question. That was by the way, great cup. Not that we're sponsored or anything, but a great establishment. Now that I'm starting to get hungry for lunchtime, that was the answer was better put than I think the question was. But just kind of wanted to get something on Jahmai Mashack. Again, we know what sort of defensive presence that he's going to bring to the table, and didn't want the whole podcast to go by without talking about him.
Yeah, for sure.
Ryan, I'm looking at my rundown right now. I only really have sort of predictions left on the table, sort of bold-ish, maybe just kind of general predictions on the table. I do want to sort of close with that. So between now and then, is there anything that we might have missed along the way that you've sort of had rattling around in your head that you want to talk about, whether it be a player, whether it be a scheme, a concept, a scheduling thing, anything that you want to hit on before we get into maybe some of the bold-ish predictions heading into the season?
No, I think we've hit everything before that.
Yeah, I think we have too. We've only been going for about 50 minutes or so. All right. Well, then let's go ahead and go straight to it. Ryan, this is a big season for Tennessee basketball. They brought in a lot to fill some gaps where they were needed. They've also been reliant on some of these freshmen from last year's team who they want to see make a jump up in their second year with the program. There's a lot of new faces that will be mixing together, but it's also going to be a daunting league. I was looking at some of the predictions for around the SEC, and I was like, man, a lot of those names, it's almost one of those things where I'm like, man, that guy's still there. I would have thought maybe that guy'd be off to the NBA by now or off to somewhere else by now. But there's a lot of very talented players in the SEC. You've got Wade Taylor IV at A&M. You've got Janai Broome at Auburn. You've got Mark Sears at Alabama. You've got Grant Nelson at Alabama. Who am I missing? I could be missing several different players. You've got John Calipari. Absolutely. You've got John Calipari who moved his operation over to Arkansas. You've got Mark Pope, who moved his operation back home, I guess you could say for him, to Lexington for the Kentucky Wildcats. There's so much going on. Is there any specific direction that you have when talking about some predictions for this team, whether it be about the internal roster and whatever is happening internally over at Tennessee right now, or just in sort of the more grand landscape of things when it comes to SEC basketball as a whole?
Well, I'll start, I guess, with Tennessee.
Yes.
And again, semi-bold would probably be the right word.
Bold-ish.
Yeah, bold-ish. I think Felix Alparo will be the best rim protector of the Rick Barnes, or the best low post defender of Rick Barnes' tenure. That doesn't feel that bold. I think he'll record the most blocks in a single season in Tennessee history. The game's changed. I haven't followed along enough to say he'll be the best low post defender in Tennessee history, but I think he'll end up blocking the most shots. So I'll say that. I'll say that Cade Phillips, and again, out semi-bold, Cade Phillips ends up being in the top 8 of the rotation once SEC play rolls around. It starts to get weaseled down a little bit. I'm trying to think. There was one more that I'm blanking on now. I'll say Zakai Ziegler is an All-American by the end of the season. I think he'll put up very good numbers. I think he'll be, and I'll say this to Zakai. And I don't know if this is bolder or less bold. I'll say Zakai will be more important to Tennessee's team than any other player in the SEC will be to their team. Janai Broome at Auburn would be the only other one I would put in that same realm. And even as good as Mark Sears is at Alabama, I think they have enough answers around them. Besides him, I think Zakai will be more important to Tennessee than anyone else on any other team, and I think he'll put up good enough numbers to sneak in like a third team All-American.
Yeah, I mean, is there even a true backup point guard? Right now behind Zakai, and I think there's
not a true one.
I think that's a lot of the reason why you say that. Am I correct in that thinking right there?
Yeah, it just goes back to what we've talked about a lot earlier about how dependent it feels like they're going to be on him on the offensive end.
Yeah, I think those are good. I don't know what his career average is for double doubles, but I think that could be a lifted stat, because I think that he's going to have a lot of assist opportunities and a lot of scoring opportunities, especially when you talk about the assists. I think that Chaz Lanier is going to be a great catch and shoot guy on the perimeter. You didn't necessarily see that as much against Indiana, but again, first game with Tennessee, first true game in Thompson-Boling Arena, and then they'll get to the regular season right there. But I think with Chaz Lanier on the outside, with Jordan Gainey on the outside, And then certainly with Akpar in the middle that we've so raved about at the beginning of the show today, I think that he's going to have a ton of opportunities for assists. And that's going to be the important thing to me for Zakai. There's going to be nights where he's not scoring as much. A, can he get to the free throw line to manufacture some of those points? But B, how much is he still involved in the offense with the assist category? I think that is always going to be a lot. The answer to that question, how much is he involved? So I agree. I think there's so much that Zakai Ziegler is going to be doing for this team. But I also think that he's the leader, right? He's the guy who can step up and get these guys in line, especially with all the different new faces who are coming in. Yes, there are guys who understand the standard and the expectations. I feel like I'm Rodney Gardner talking to the other day in the video that we put out on Twitter. The standards, the expectations, what's tolerated, what's not tolerated. I look at Zakai Ziegler as the one to deliver that message. Obviously, Jemai Mashak is an extremely important leader in that room as well. And then who's the third senior that I'm blanking on? Jordan Gainey. Jordan Gainey, especially with his father being there. Jordan Gainey is not a rookie to the program anymore. I look at those three guys for leadership from the team, but there's going to be a lot riding on Zakai Ziegler's shoulders this year. I think that he is up for the challenge. I've not seen him not up for a challenge at any other point during his career. So I think that going back to my original point, I don't know what his career number or season high number for double doubles is, but I think that he's going to have an opportunity to hit that. I mean, each and every night. It's certainly not going to happen, but each and every night it's on the table because of how much the ball will be in his hands and how much he's going to be asked to do to create offense, to keep the ball moving, and to help Tennessee manufacture points on the scoreboard.
For sure. No, I completely agree. I mean, it didn't feel like he played particularly good against Indiana, and I think he had 13 and 8 in that game. Yeah, 13 and 8, did have 5 turnovers, didn't shoot particularly well. Like, you're right.
And that's what, like, Lanier missing a ton of shots. If Lanier maybe had made a couple more, then I think that he does hit the double-double mark.
And it just goes back to everything we've been saying about how dependent Tennessee is going to be on Zakai's offense. Like, he's just going to create so much. And I think naturally off of that, on nights when Tennessee hits shots, he's going to have a lot of assists.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are approaching the 60-minute mark. Not that we have a hard out or anything like that, but it seems about a good time to kind of wrap this thing up for folks getting ready for Tennessee basketball. Anything else that you want to say that we might have missed, along the way as boy, oh boy, Tennessee's season opener is just around the corner. More on that here in just a minute.
No, not really. Kind of hate the non-conference schedule. Not very many fun matchups.
Yeah, I'm looking through right now. Virginia in November. That's
yuck.
Something.
No, Virginia's awful. They'll play.
I guess their coach just left.
Yeah, they'll play a fun game after that because that's in the Bahamas. They'll get either Baylor or St. John's. And I think that's probably the best. That one of those two will be the best team they play. Illinois, on the road will be a tough matchup. Louisville, I'm intrigued by. Louisville is going to be a lot better than they've been, and that there's games in a week and a half. So will be our first big regular season look at this team.
Yeah, that second game, season opener Monday, November 4th at home against Gardner-Webb. But then even peeking out, and we're going to be talking about the SEC schedule probably in November, December, so in the midst of the football postseason. But woo, boy, you look at those first three games of the SEC slate, and it is home against number 16 Arkansas, at number 21 Florida, at number 19 Texas. 3 huge games to start out Tennessee's SEC run. We just talked about it. It's going to be a deep league, so make sure to buckle up for the whole Southeastern Conference ride.
100%. Like I said, it's going to be a no days off type of league. Very few freebies. Tennessee's going to need to defend home floor really well, win a lot of games at home, rack up a lot of wins there because they're not going to be easy anywhere, but they're going to be especially hard on the road in the conference this season.
Ryan, a masterful performance by you as always. Hey, look, I'm telling you, not only do I work with this guy, so, yes, I'm partly trying to, bring people to us, but there's nobody better in the business to me than what Ryan Shumpert does and sort of the analysis and the way that he can look at the game, the way that he can break it all down. So, Ryan, thank you very much for all of that information today. Boy, oh boy, is it crossover season in Knoxville, Tennessee. Not only is there fall ball baseball happening that's been going on, you can head over to RockyTopInsider.com to find out the latest on fall ball baseball. But the Tennessee football Volunteers are in the middle of a playoff push themselves as they host Kentucky this weekend in a dark mode game. And then, of course, we just said it, Monday evening, Tennessee basketball opens up the regular season slate. I believe Tennessee women's basketball opens up their season tonight, or is this just an exhibition?
Tonight.
Okay,
yeah,
exhibition
tonight against Carson Newman. And they play the Sanford Bulldogs is their opener. I'm not sure what night that is, but it's really funny because Sanford, I don't know anything about their women's program, but their men's program, Buckyball, very similar style to Kim Caldwell plays.
Like, yeah,
up and
no
down,
kidding.
Press full court the whole game.
Shoot, rebound.
Play a ton of super fast. So I don't know if there's any sort of translation, but certainly the Sanford women's program has seen a program very similar to what the Tennessee Lady Vols are trying to do when they look across the gymnasium and watch the men's team practice.
Hey, how about that secret game, that secret report? I don't know the secret scrimmage. I don't know the legitimacy of it myself, but it looked like fine reporting on social media that Tennessee trounced a top 15 North Carolina State team, and again a secret scrimmage as it was North Carolina, that was reported on Twitter. So Kim Caldwell, I think they put up 95 points as what was reported in that tweet. Boy, oh boy. 94. Could be a very fun offense for the Lady Vols brewing with Kim Caldwell and what she could do. So anticipating seeing that right now. There is a massive crossover season right here in Knoxville, Tennessee, and we have got you covered.
For sure. It's the same thing. It's the other side of it with the men's team. It's like, you got to be even more careful in a closed door scrimmage that I don't think even a box score came out of. We just got to score as opposed to an exhibition game. But yeah, it's like definitely really exciting, but kind of you're like, don't want to go too far and glean too much from it. But they should have a really fun team to watch for sure this season.
All right, well, that's going to wrap us up for today. We'll be back sometime next week. We're going to be talking
Saturday
football
night.
On one show. Saturday night, that's right. We got a football breakdown to get to from the Kentucky game, but then we're going to be talking about basketball a little bit next week as well. Sunday morning. Golly, this thing's at 7:45 p.m. It is going to be a late night with a late recording. So as you're on your way to, I guess, Sunday morning church or whatever, you can listen to Ryan and I's breakdown of the Tennessee-Kentucky game on the RTI Press Pass. But again, I sound like a broken record. It's crossover season right here in Knoxville, and we are covering it all. So make sure that you are staying tuned into RockyTopInsider.com each and every day for the latest Tennessee news, notes, and coverage. If you want to follow Ryan on Twitter, you can do that at rshump00. That's RSCHUMP00. If you want to follow myself, you can do that at Rick_Butler, just RIC_Butler. But of course, make sure you're checking out Rocky Top Insider social media platforms each and every day. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you are, we probably are as well. So just search at Rocky Top Insider there and you will find it. Ryan, you and I are going to be at Tennessee basketball practice a little bit later on today. So make sure you're checking out the website after you listen to this podcast for some news and notes. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and get out of here, get this podcast up to you guys. Thank you very much for listening. It's going to be a fun season. We certainly hope that you follow Rocky Top Insider throughout it all. We certainly thank you for listening to this whole preview with us today. Have a good one. Happy Halloween. And for Ryan Shumpert and Rick Butler, this has been the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass Podcast.